Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Pollock-Milgate. I'm a partner here in the Indianapolis office in intellectual property, and also member of Bartz and Thornburg's Life Sciences practice group. I am so excited to see all of these people in person today. I was a little skeptical when we started talking about going back to all in person because I really like the flexibility that other people from other places around the country can tune in, but clearly not only is the subject matter going to be great for today, but everybody looks eager to be here. So thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic to our fearless leader, Kristen Jones, the CEO and president of IHIS. Take it away.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. And as Deborah said, it's great to see everybody here. I'm going to apologize. I have a little tickle left over from a cold, but I'm not contagious, and hopefully I can get through this without too many interruptions on this one. We are so excited to have Colonel Clark here today. This has been several months in the planning, and I really want to thank our friends at Kaleo for helping and bring him into Indianapolis and coordinating with us on this program. The timing worked out great, and as we can see, the interest in this program is particularly high. We suspected it would be for this one. Just in case I don't get to it at the end, I do want to let you know the next month's topic for May will be the promises and challenges of gene therapy. So if you're planning on joining us for May, please come back for that one. It will be the third Tuesday for that one. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Colonel Matthew Clark. I'm going to have to read some of this because he has one of the longest titles I've come across in a while, so I want to make sure I get it right. He is the Joint Project Manager for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Medical. He is responsible for leading the medical portfolio for the Joint Program Executive Office for, I'm just going to say CBRN, if that's a good use of an acronym, and nuclear defense there. Some really cool parts of this. He previously served as Senior Policy Advisor and Director of the COVID-19 International Response Operations on the White House COVID-19 Response Team, after serving as the Lead Program Manager for the Vaccine Team and Operation Warp Speed. He was on hiatus from serving as the Director of the Office of Medical Systems under the Assistant Secretary for the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. On the White House, I'm just going to call it the response team, he led operations to move over 1.2 billion COVID vaccines to 115 countries bilaterally and through many organizations that were all touched by this initiative. He worked the whole of government vaccine response through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Coordination Operation Response Element, at the Departments of State and Defense, the U.S. Agency for AID, or Agency for International Development, AID, the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. FDA, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The public-private team he led delivered over 534 million doses. So as anybody who is vaccinated, I think we have him to thank for making sure that got to us. And certainly here in Indianapolis, where we both produce and distribute a lot of the vaccines, we know how important that entire effort was. He is a distinguished graduate of Coe College and received a PhD in Behavioral and Neurosciences from Rutgers University. He has several books. He has a man of distinction for sure. So we are very pleased to have Colonel Clark with us today. I will turn it over to you. You folks have note cards at your tables. If you have questions you would like to ask towards the end of the program, please write them out. I'll come around, or Deborah and I will come around and collect those, and we'll just sort of run through those with him afterwards. I'm afraid we have to do that just for the sake of program recording and making sure everyone can hear all the questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Colonel Clark and let him begin his effort here.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Let me get this box somewhere. We'll get started and then we'll start roaming around. First of all, I apologize for all of the letters in our alphabet soup. You know, that's one of the things in the military we're very proud of, is knowing the alphabet. So it's a good start, So as you heard, I've got the pleasure to speak to you today to talk about really the COVID response in many ways and how we responded to the pandemic up front. But I get to do it from a couple of different perspectives. I get to do it from my current job, which is that JPM medical thing, and also to talk to you about it, what it was like operating in these different environments over the last several years. It's been interesting. I'm thrilled to be your first talk back in person. I will tell you, it's been interesting because I never had to return to the office because we never left the office. But at least we're thrilled that we can do this now today and do this together and talk about. I'll talk about partnerships in just a moment. Well, I want to talk to you about. I'm going to keep it focused today on medical countermeasures for biodefense. And biodefense is a big term, right? It could really be just about anything. But as it relates to me, usually in this uniform, we're focused on the military and focused on the service members and their families, beneficiaries around the world. And that's normally what we're focusing on. Of course, it's not in the presentation because I'm not necessarily supposed to say it this way, but you've already kind of got a hint that it's also about global public health. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about and how we learn from this global pandemic and take advantage of those things so we can do it better, how we can be better. It was fascinating how it all developed. And there are some items that we'll highlight that I think will be quite useful for us to talk about that we're taking advantage of today. Some of them are obvious, some of them may not be obvious, so don't be afraid to ask questions. So obviously, we're facing a complex threat, and this one's a little bit dated, but you can see some of the items that we've got up here. Not only, well, at this point that we created this, it was the Omicron variant. Now we've got various variants that continue to emerge for this particular threat. We've also got VX nerve agent being utilized around the world by some of our enemies. We've got Russians have a Salisbury nerve agent poisoning, various biosecurity threats that we're seeing as things we have to face. Monkeypox. Now, monkeypox is then morphed into Sudan virus, Ebola, Marburg. In the last year, we've had at least 4 outbreaks that my team has had to be prepared to respond to. And so it really doesn't stop. And this is the bioenvironment we're dealing with. And this is something that for us has been, we've been kind of in the background for a long time, working through this and thinking about it. But this is more of the reason to expose to you all why we're doing some of these things. Notice very few of them are actually here in the United States per se. But as we saw with even COVID itself, SARS-CoV-2 ends up mutating and easily jumping the pond to us. So we've got to be prepared. So when it comes to biosecurity, we're seeing a lot of activity in that space, whether as it relates to the National Biodefense Strategy and Implementation Plan. By the way, awesome to see an actual implementation plan being considered, not just words on a page. And then things that we can move towards to actually be, try and be responsive with really bold goals. 100 days for vaccines in people through phase 1. Wow, sounds crazy. Well, it kind of is crazy, but we're pretty close to that with Operation Warp Speed. So the question is, as we jump into this, I'm going to give you a little bit about who I am and who my organization is. Then I'll talk to you about what we're going to do to try and get there. My mission: deliver quality, safe, effective, integrated medical solutions to counter CBRN threats for the joint force. CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. That vision is a prepared, responsive, fully layered and integrated medical countermeasure capability protecting unencumbered U.S. military lethality in any CBRN battle space worldwide. Okay, I'm the military guy. This is what I was talking about earlier. But the reality is we can't always be funding these things into perpetuity, right? So we need to be linked with our partners. And by partners, we're looking for commercial partners that are producing capabilities that have utility, not just for the men and women in uniform and their families, but for other related threats. And that's what we do. And that's how we claim, and I'll show you in a little more detail later, but success is dependent upon the people who do it. Seems obvious, but the people starts with, it's an acronym because, you know, what we like acronym soup, but it starts with the P, which is partnerships. Then we have our engagement, we have opportunities, which only comes about through engagement, pushing each other, right? Not competitively, not antagonistically, finding ways to collaborate, to develop capabilities, but we do it by actually pushing each other off base a little bit. To create the flywheel of progress or start the flywheel of progress, that leads to leadership, and then utilizing leadership to ultimately get excellence, which is quality. Excellence is another name for quality. So these are the things that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit today. People that look at us don't always understand that, you know, hey, well, wait a minute, why is the U.S. military doing this? Why isn't it just HHS? Okay, good question, really good question. And as you'll see through Operation Warp Speed, it ends up being all of us. It's no one silo of excellence. But in the military, we're working in global locations. We're working in an austere location. We have to be proactive. Otherwise, our missions cannot fail with the size of units that we utilize. And we have to use layered defense, both medical and non-medical. And then we are also warfighter centric. Makes sense, what I just sort of presented to you. HHS, the Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, and BARDA is really, they do the same thing I do, they just do it on behalf of Health and Human Services. Their focus is generally on domestic production. They're thinking oftentimes about optimal environments, aka hospitals, places where they can provide care at a level that I can't provide care. Although I think Operation Warp Speed broke that down a little bit. And then they can be reactive because they have resources to bring to bear to a challenge. I can't do that. This is why I have to be proactive and work in an austere environment. They are treatment focused, and because they're working with companies, then they have a profit potential. We have to think about that too. We not have to, want to think about it because we want to sustain and maintain our medical capability. Because the military is not the big buyer in the room, if you will. We are just a part of the system. So that's what we do. This is why military thinks about this, but we also don't do it alone. In fact, one of my biggest partners is BARDA. And during Operation Warp Speed, that's where I spent all my time as the senior program manager for the vaccine team, was at BARDA. What we do, integrated layered defense, just to make sure our lexicon is everybody understands. We are interested in protect, understand, and mitigate. This is what we talk about with our congressional colleague friends to help them understand as the money flows down, they know which bin it goes in. And that's where we talk about it, protect, understand, and mitigate. And we do it we're interested in the medical space because we cover all of the areas, whereas some of the other areas like sensors, they don't cover all of the areas, right? They'll do an understand part, usually. A sensor is trying to get information, right? And then the JPM protection end will do the protect part. They'll have the suits, boots, masks, and gloves. In my case, I'm focused in on prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. And by prevention, we actually split that out two ways, which you'll see in a little bit as well, which is around pre-exposure prophylaxis and post-exposure prophylaxis. So that's my organization. So let's shift to what we did in Operation Warp Speed. Basically, part of the challenge in Operation Warp Speed was we had, by the way, I think they were being super optimistic using 73 months on this slide. They said in 73 months, typically you could get to a capability of development. It uses a waterfall model that goes from the earlier elements of creating the vaccine, well, actually discovery, and then preclinical work, and then clinical work, and then into manufacturing phase, and then finally into our distribution phase. When this first came out, I was even one of the people who said, gosh, I don't know how we're going to accelerate this. Mainly because it's driven oftentimes by both, there's a risk avoidance approach to this, which also relates to money a lot of times. So that's the typical process. But we have a mission, and General Perna pulled us all into a room in July 22nd and said, look, your mission is clear. You will deliver 300 million doses of a safe and effective vaccine by the 1st of January, 2021. That was our mission. And he was a little frustrated because he had heard people, the naysayers out there saying, this sir, you're crazy. He said, I got my mission. I'm going to drive forward with my mission, and we're going to accomplish this the best way we can. And, oh, by the way, the conversation was a closed room with just military folks. We were getting we sometimes call it wall-to-wall counseling. We were getting some personal time with the general. It's never a good thing. But it was the kind of thing that helped you see that, yes, sir, we're going to do this. And the other thing he did, and you'll see this, you might see this a little later, he empowered each and every one of us to take action. You don't get a room of approximately this size filled with mostly military, mostly colonels, which is pretty high rank, and they're being told, you have to take action and go. Well, how do I do that, sir? I've got to double check. No, you have my intent. Take action and move out. You were selected to be here because of your skill set and your ability to move forward. We're not developing people through this crisis. You're fixing things. You're moving things. You're going to be behind the scenes helping BARDA and HHS do their part. And that's why when some people said, this is crazy, why would you have the military working with HHS? Well, I will tell you my personal opinion, having lived it and then watched it from the White House, what that allowed us to do is that created a synergy. Some people thought there would be a cultural clash. And at first there kind of was like, well, why do you got to be here? Well, we do it a little differently than you all do, right? And is that bad? No. It actually was quite good because the teams that led, the PCTs that led at BARDA, they were run primarily by scientists. And then we brought in folks like myself, program managers, operations individuals, logisticians, people that were contractors, people that could think through some of the problems and challenges that existed there. And what we did ultimately is the way to get there was we were planning for 14 months, which is really fast. We did it in 10. From the point that we identified the product and to the point where it was delivered at the end of December, we did it in basically 10. So that's, and we did that through really overlapping iterations. Those who've done any type of agile development, that's basically the idea that we were running as we were building it. And these were, that's how we did it. But again, it started with a bias for action. So that's the main thing I want you to take away from this. And also, when you look a little later, you're going to ask about, well, how could you move so fast in some of those contracting areas? Well, we had relationships already with some of the performers. They also just happened to be the ones that had the product that was at the right level of maturity for the risk we were willing to accept. And that's an important point you're going to see in a moment too, in terms of how we're taking advantage of this. So this is what we're stuck with. We end up with Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech they plan for, Moncef Slaoui planned for 3 different platforms and 2 performers each. We were given the flexibility by the president and by Congress to actually take some action here, which was really good. They allowed us not only to do what we normally do, which would be to, make sure that we've got primarily one and a backup. That's what we try to do. But they let us do it across multiple platforms because our ability to get out of this situation depended upon it. Interestingly, you ended up with 3 different categories, mRNA vaccines, which nobody was quite sure how that would do. We had, of course, the adenovirus or the viral vectors that were there, as well as the more traditional protein subunit vaccines of Novavax and Sanofi. Notice they're not all big companies. Now, 4 of them are. One of them is now a bigger company, but originally Moderna was a pretty small company that was more aligned with the science and technology side, NIH, and then also Novavax, which was the protein subunit vaccine. These were where we were, and then we worked as the PM over all of these. I had a PM at each one of these teams that would work to basically help them build a schedule, help them do program management, right? It's not very sexy to some folks, but this is how you get things done on a schedule, especially when you have limited resources, actually. And folks would say, well, you didn't really have limited resources. Not necessarily, but time is still a resource. So we were limited. We had to take action. So the things that I want you to take away, this is really some of the lessons learned part, is the key element here. You've heard me say action is required for progress. If you don't do it, you're not going to find any way to proceed. And public-private partnerships were key. Being on the phone with each of our partners daily, sometimes hourly, was absolutely critical for our success. And they had to be open to it. And then we had to there was time when we had to bring them on site with us. And oh, by the way, I had to send majors, they were all majors at the time, to be persons in the plant. So they could actually help and assist. Use the expertise that we have with regard to our logistics and moving supplies when your supply chain is all tied up, and try and find ways to move. And again, remember, a lot of these supplies aren't actually in the United States. This creates an even bigger problem because you can't even always use DPA authorities, the Defense Production Act authorities that we were using. At times, you needed people that knew how to grease the skids and how to work with the providers on the ground and the supplier on the ground. And that's honestly how we were able to move so much of the product that was needed to be able to do these studies. And also, we provided through DoD activities, we also provided what's called log camp. We provided trailers to do our clinical trials in. You probably, well, I should remember that was part of my responsibility, but we probably had some here as well. So these are some of the activities that we did there with regard to public-private partnerships. And then the other thing that we had to do was we had to be honest and upfront. That's where we get to the group problem solving. Group problem solving, sometimes, back to the engagement part, I'll highlight for you in a moment again, is sometimes you have to have the difficult conversation. Sometimes that difficult conversation comes from Colonel Matt Clark. Sometimes that difficult conversation comes from General Gus Perna. Obviously, one has a whole lot more weight. Sometimes that difficult conversation came from the White House. And so these are important things for us to understand. The group problem solving is getting people at echelon, at the layers of the organization to be able to work the problem together. And that is a key element that gets us through all of these activities is group problem solving. Sometimes getting on the phone and saying, I understand you want to do it this way. We've talked to different parts of the organization and used what we would call an IPT structure and asked them through their integrated product teams to say, what's the best way that you think we can do this? And then we would implement it. And so some takeaways for you to take home are find simple ways to see yourself regularly. We were working, in fact, Tiberius is something, it's one of our biggest wins almost nobody talks about. Tiberius was a system that once we start delivering vaccine, we know exactly where the vaccine is at every stage of the way. And Tiberius was a system we built from the ground up to support the COVID response. We knew where the product was in its development. We knew where it was when it was delivered. Then we could do supply and operations planning, just like anybody would in a manufacturing base. And those are the elements that we would be able to drive forward and see ourselves. Now, we would also do this through tabletop exercises and whiteboarding sessions. Different levels of leadership, different levels of the organization, but actually rehearse it, walk it through, talk it through. Find where you have flaws in your process. And those are key. And then when we would just deliver something, iterate, and incrementally grow through that rehearsal, and then operate via intent, empowerment, and trust. And that's what I mentioned about General Perna being such a huge powerhouse in this, in that we were empowered to do things. Next, the other thing I would say is that you should take is engage your regulatory organizations early and often. How many of you are producing drugs or FDA-regulated products? Just a couple. Generally, do we talk to them much? Some do. The better ones do. Because when you talk to the FDA, they will help you understand the pressures, the guidance, because guidance is constantly changing. And then to make sure we're doing it right. Because they're the independent arbiter of what is safe and what is effective. They're the ones. And they're wonderful people, really smart people. Sometimes you don't think they're wonderful, but they're really intelligent, smart people that are doing the right thing around the data and science. And devoid of anything that might look like it's political. And that's why you want to engage them often. You also, this is one from my time at the White House. Build technology for distribution to the world. Not all of our vaccines were built for distribution to the world. They were built to get out fast. But we have at least one vaccine that was not built to the standard volume. And so countries, low and middle income countries that that rely on a particular type of syringe because of safety, because they've had HIV and other things like that where people weren't using it properly, we had to find really novel ways to get after that. And we didn't build that from the outset. We were a little egocentric in my view. That's my own personal view. Last, consider the full capability, life cycle, and supportability at the outset. These are absolutely key for your success across the board. This organization, JPEO-CBRND Medical, because I lead the organization now, I'd like to highlight some of the great work they were doing there. People don't know that CBRND Medical was working with Cepheid, doing the Gene Expert system. That's one of the big systems around the country that was doing COVID-19 testing. Super easy to use. You can see this little cartridge here. This little cartridge, basically you can clip the items off and it goes into the cartridge, and then you can run the sample. That was something that we worked with Cepheid on. We still work with Cepheid. BioFire, which we call the next generation diagnostic system, helped have one of the first COVID-19 tests. We also worked on various consumables, nasal swabs, remdesivir. We were involved in remdesivir getting out. And the next one is MK4482. That's also, you'll know that now as molnupiravir. That was work that we were intimately involved in. We're also still doing items with repurposing, which I'm going to tell you about lessons learned in a moment. But looking at Leukyne, Tavalisse, Arcoda, different products that could be repurposed, trying to be effective as fast as we could with the products that we had and that were being worked in our system. So this brings me back to my the original command and leader philosophy. And honestly, the way that we get this done is going to be through the partnerships, our engagement. The engagement creates opportunity. The opportunity turns the flywheel of progress so it can spin on its own, right? And once that progress is there, you need quality leaders out front that are willing to tell you what they're seeing and what they're not. And what they see is the vision for the future. Because this isn't just managing the process along the way. It's envisioning what you're going to do. Give it a date and work backwards. That's what General Perna said. We're going to do 300 million. Got it, sir. I'm going to do 300 million. Do I have a little bit of uncertainty? Sure, I do. But I'm going to do it. And not just because I was saluting a man that I respect greatly, but because we were empowered to take the action. And then think about quality up front. Think about the items that you need so people trust it. We had numerous conversations on these vaccines about the diversity that was required for our clinical trials to help get people to see once they come out, yes, I see myself in that process. And those are some of the things that we work through. And as people deliver, our entire enterprise delivers. And that's ultimately our philosophy. And this is a philosophy that I brought back into this organization. I tell you that because that leads into how we do the future and how we learn from some of those lessons. This is called the medical countermeasure operational view. Historically speaking, we would we take known threats. In my lane, oftentimes there's anthrax, Ebola, Marburg, and now Nipah, Hendra is in there, Nipah is in there, Hendra is in there. Various either bacteria or viruses or chemical warfare agents like VX, G agents, sarin, soin, taboon, et cetera. And normally we would identify those, and then we have this traditional MCM development, which is, you can see is deliberate, okay? That follows the more traditional step process and allows us to find balance with regard to our very limited resources. Because in the DoD, we don't have a lot of resources towards this problem. However, what we learned through COVID is we need to be ready to respond to the unknown threats. And we need to think about it in ways that are not just targeted, right? Go after SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19, or the Wuhan variant of COVID-19, the first variant. We need to start moving into broad thinking, and we need to think about our enablers. You got to plan for enablers. Utilize your enablers, because I'll tell you, one of the items that I kind of glossed over, NIH was still involved with us all throughout the development of these vaccines. They held a session with the super smart vaccinologists and immunologists, and we'd get together, and I attended that meeting in addition to the PM meetings once a week, and we would talk through the data we're seeing from the clinical trials. That would help us make better choices. On the military side, I have to care about all three levels. Remember, I told you austere, the first responder or self-aid, all the way down to medical treatment facilities. And so we are now building things in both of these ways. Now I'm going to tell you more about this rapid response repurposing. These are eye charts. I'll go through these rather quickly, but just because they cover what my program is today. I do botulinum monoclonal antibodies, or monoclonal antibodies for botulinum, smallpox, post-exposure prophylaxis. This is something that Congress gave to us as a special interest. And then what we did is thought about how it could be even more useful, and then adapted it to a post-exposure prophylaxis, which is very useful for us in the DoD. Diagnosis, manned portable diagnostic system. We have a chemical diagnostics detector, and then various therapeutics that are antivirals, auto-injector manufacturing, which is why I was here today, which I want to thank Kaleo for that. Kaleo and we got to see Kimball Electronics. Really, really exceptional stuff you have here in Indy with regard to your programs and the companies. Also sustained release pyridostigmine bromide, which is just a pre-treatment for nerve agents. These are just the items that we're working on, and we'll go through each of them in detail, but I will highlight one for you that I'm going to bring up in a little later. And this is the advanced differential diagnostics. Just remember that in a moment. It's an important one because the short version is it's a way for us to continue at the point of need to be able to look at the differences between bacterial or viral. Again, broad spectrum. We need to expand the decision space of our medical providers on the battlefield so that we can help provide better care. And that's what we're going to be learning from. So this is where we lean into the lessons learned and repurposing. Before I get into that, I'm going to start with this clinical practice guideline informed development. One of the items that we can take from the experience in COVID, and you saw the development of these capabilities, is we need to find ways to get after capabilities that will go from here we were before, which is the exposure or the event. You get symptom onset, you use some standardized supportive care, and then sometime later you identify a specific threat and you treat it. It's not good enough from what we learned in COVID. What we need to do is we need to move to an area where we are able to go from exposure to symptom onset to diagnostics that tell us to take action more assertively now, right? The COVID virus itself spins up through a cascade of events that if we can get ahead of it, we can stop it, or at least slow it to the point that more people have better outcomes. That's the goal. And if we can start that, is it the perfect solution? No, it's probably not. And that's okay. But it's a bigger line of defense that leads to, we not only have bacterial versus viral point of care testing, then we get into positive identification of the threat. Then we can do either a broad spectrum antimicrobial or antiviral, if that happens to be what the threat is, and then identify the specific threat. In other words, you're doing several things at once. You have to do them together so that you can then, just like we did in Operation Warp Speed. Honestly, my opinion is we did a good job on the vaccines. We can do better. We didn't do a good job, in my opinion, again, this is Matt Clark's opinion, not my organization's opinion, on the therapeutics. We tried, but we somehow struggled a little bit there. We had plenty of patience, so we should have been able to do better there, but not sure why. But that's where we want to get after that. And we do these things in parallel. And that means from our end, I want to bring you back to clinical practice guideline informed development. To do this stuff on the right, symptom onset, diagnostic supportive care, do I have something that's a broad spectrum antiviral or antimicrobial? Well, maybe. The problem is you develop them from the ground up, usually going specific first, right? Go after a specific target. That's how you get things through the FDA most cleanly. This is where we need some flexibility, and that's where we need to continue to work. By going after the prodrome, which are the items that predict what's going to happen, then you can have a better idea of how you need to treat them. So that's what we're doing in our organization, and I haven't seen too many places that are thinking about it in this way. Actually, one other thing I'll say, this means that when you look at your problem set, it's not going to be one size fits all. You may have a pre-exposure prophylaxis, a post-exposure prophylaxis, a treatment, and you will definitely need a diagnosis. This is our strategy, is going after broad spectrum and also targeted, and that's ultimately what's going to help us exploit the capabilities that exist to be faster. One of the other things that we're doing with this, what this one is meant to say, is we are going to be utilizing computational and preclinical data packages to drive forward and collect the data from the studies we do now to help us be more effective. As we do that, we'll utilize programs like Accelerated Antibodies, which is run by my teammate over in Enabling Biotechnologies. We have VAMP. I'm going to show you what VAMP is in a second, Vaccine Acceleration by Modular Progression. We have, those are two big programs. And then I have a program called RADAR that I'm going to tell you about, which is a repurposing effort. It's utilizing the items that are available to us today. So starting with RADAR, RADAR has value because it allows us to determine what is existing in the US FDA approved kit bag today. Now, it's not throwing spaghetti at a wall. Please don't walk away with that message. It's using the mechanism of action and a dose that we predict will be approximately, and it will be close to the dose that's needed to then determine, does it go into humans for that threat? Ethically, that means we have to do some studies beforehand. So what we do is we lean into these and we identify the drugs that might be on the shelf today. Now, not all companies want to play this game because either one, they see it as risk, right? Or they see it as a challenge to their potential bottom line, when I would argue they should probably flip that because it may be an opportunity for them to protect their IP, continue to work with their IP, and it provides opportunities for them to utilize their drugs in other ways. It allows us to maximize the use of the clinical trial data that they've already paid for. And that way they can pivot to get a capability that this is where I think you're going to find your broad spectrum capabilities up front. Because then I can start to treat, again, I said earlier, extend the decision time of the medical provider on the ground. As we extend that decision time, we have more time to figure out what the right product is. That's the specific product, where that's possible. Then also, I mentioned clinical practice guidelines. Then what we do, even if we test a drug and it's negative, we can put that information into our DoD clinical practice guidelines. Now, the provider, when they look up the clinical practice guidelines, they can say, oh, somebody already tested that. I can save that time and hopefully have a better outcome. And that way we're getting the highest priority to products that are going to be available for us to use as soon as possible. This also allows us to pre-position in some cases for emergency use authorization where appropriate. EUA is not a one-size-fits-all tool. Please keep that in mind. Label expansion is an option. We proceed to what we call a program of record. We develop the product for full use, and oftentimes that's for stockpiling if we need it. And then of course we update our formulary and the repurposing reports. That's the Raider program. That's definitely learning, and it's only available to us because of what we learned during COVID. We've tried for like 20 years to do it, and we were told we couldn't do it. Now we figured out that the enterprise says it's good to go. What it does is you're using demonstrated safety that's already been demonstrated in generally hundreds to thousands of people, and that gives us a better sense for what's safe. Also, it's already manufactured. That you take that out of your process, and or you've got a process for making it. So that's going to be faster and that's going to be cheaper. And this is going to probably provide us our broad spectrum MCMs to bridge between threat emergence and that targeted therapy. This mitigates warfighter symptoms and expedites return to action. Bottom line is it's repurposing. Next is VAMP, that vaccine acceleration by modular progression. VAMP is doing something that it is vaccines. What it's doing is it's identifying delivering capabilities for defense, deterrence, and speed and responsiveness. It basically is, and I'll show you here in a moment, actually I'll jump to it now. It's a system of systems approach to vaccine development. Historically, we would go after a vaccine with all of these elements and then you run forward. What we're doing now is we're looking at breaking it out, not just by platform, but activation of the immune system, adjuvants, payload delivery system and delivery method, and product form. As we break it out across these different areas, we have 6 different efforts right now that are working across these that will allow us to come together so that they can then we'll have the relationships already in place. And at least we have access to a platform that we can start to use. And that might be mRNA, might be self-amplifying RNA, it might be more traditional protein subunit, but those are items that we're getting after today. Or the MVA, the modified vaccinia, Ankara is one that is used like by Bavarian Nordic, for example. And one of the last things I'm going to highlight for you is that we're learning to use is assay challenges. What we learned through COVID is that we need to consider both potency assays and also both immunization and sort of standards. So you could use, possibly have an assay that will accelerate products through development. Not all of the vaccines were able to get through quickly because they didn't have all of the assays that they would need in place to demonstrate the product was safe and effective, and also that they can manufacture it in a consistent way. That's a challenge. And that helps as we standardize and work on this particular challenge. It's one that allows us to really target the solutions using means that will allow us to get to a capability that we can use more quickly. Last, we need to pivot to computationally enabled capability-based preparedness posture. We need more data. This is something that we're going to be spending a lot of time on. It'll be fun to see what it develops into. I think we'll all see more on this over the next couple of years, but data is how we can pull in that data to then activate it quickly. and be able to respond quickly, because data is what's ultimately going to drive this. And so this digital transformation that you're seeing in the Army is something that I think we are going to be a big part of as well, as it relates to the medical enterprise. And that way we can work through the manufacturing elements so we can get to the capability that we need quickly. And those are some of the tools that we're using. In our lane, this is my second to last slide. Nevertheless, we deliver is the motto of my predecessor, and he was right. Regardless of what's going on, regardless of how many AUs we get because we're DoD, we're going to deliver. But our organization has a unique skill set to support the warfighter and the nation, using these kinds of novel ways to deliver broad capability and also get after the specific capability, and ultimately to get across the continuum of care, prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. Last thing I want to highlight for you is this. If I've said it to a couple, this QR code says work with us. We'll leave this up and it's got my contact information, but work with us. If your company, even if you're not in the medical space, but you are interested in working with JPEO-CBRND, my parent organization, sensors, suits, boots, masks, and gloves, integration, so data elements, please go to that website, because and it's also typed down there. But what that'll allow you to do is put in your company information, and then that will divert you to the appropriate office in our organization, so you can share your ideas for us to work together. But hopefully, I have been able to give you the opportunity to see that we're not just running out of COVID because we've all kind of lost our minds and are crazy with all the COVID craziness that's been out there. Hopefully you're seeing that what we're trying to do is convert quickly to solutions that matter for, I'm supposed to say warfighters, but I'll also say just for all people, because that's ultimately our goal. It's ultimately my goal is to continue to help us be better. So the next time we have to face these challenges, we will have much less loss of life, even still, and be ready to respond. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh. Pass them around. If you want to hang on for just a second, thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent. So a handful of questions from the audience. What is your relationship to DTRA?
DTRA. Yeah. So the Defense Threat Reduction Agency is our S&T, our science and technology side for the bulk of our research, the bulk of our products. Not all of our products come from DTRA, but they, because in fact, just to give you some of the other places they come from, they sometimes come from DARPA, they sometimes come from industry ideas, they sometimes come from congressional special interests, they come from CRADAs, they come from SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. Sorry, CRADA is a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. What am I missing? NIH, they sometimes come from NIH. But DTRA is our biggest provider in what we call the medical architecture. And so they mitigate our risk, they help us with training, developing the data for training, and then they oftentimes will develop the products that come to us for advanced development.
Great. Next question is, how much progress are you making on onshoring critical resources? We have in addition to just sort of the general part of that, we also have a specific subset here looking at API for generics, for critical medications.
Yeah, that's a great question. I am not hugely, my office and organization is not hugely involved in doing the critical, the critical medicines, the essential medicines that need to be onshored at this point. There is interest in the enterprise to look at manufacturing optimization and to expand that to bring some of that to the United States. Now, I know that BARDA, our teammates at BARDA, are working on onshoring with various companies of the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient. But we have worked with some of those companies, and we are interested in continuing to do that. I just don't quite have the resources to do that in my space. Yeah.
More of a BARDA
Uh,
effort?
I would argue it's not more of a BARDA effort. There's products that I have in my portfolio that BARDA does not buy a huge amount of, and they wouldn't necessarily be considered essential medicines. So again, yeah, I think we're always going to come back to, if I'm not doing it with BARDA, I certainly should be. And so I think it's a partnership element.
Next one seems like radar program is a no-brainer and should have top priority. Why doesn't it have that kind of priority?
It does now. It's just it's a new effort for us. Radar is involved, well, gosh, I think we're targeting information that updates 2 clinical practice guidelines a year. And that's a lot of studies. And so it's relatively low investment wise, relatively high in terms of payout. And so we are actively, in fact, that's turning into a data effort as well. And so that is happening today, and we're expanding it. Radar, the reason it might have been perceived that it wasn't a higher priority was about 20 plus years ago when we started working on this. There's some laws that seem to be at odds with this, and they've worked out actually where the middle ground is. The lawyers, and everybody that's there. But really, ideally, you want your products, if it's something that you can define for an indication, it is best to do an indication that has that broader indication and go after that first. The radar is it's a stopgap, and it's the bridge, and I'm glad we have the bridge, but because we didn't have it before.
Great. Just a couple more, and we got a couple minutes left. Have you made any progress in dry powder, inhalable vaccines and countermeasures?
Yeah, so an area where inhalable vaccines is one of those that I'll put up here. It is something that we're working on in our VAMP program. So make progress. The progress is it's moving forward for some of those inhalable vaccines. We're not there yet. I was just at the World Vaccine Congress and Antiviral Congress, actually, the one in December, and there are lots of groups that are working this session that I was chairing that is addressing this particular challenge, because it is an obvious choice for some viruses. It also, though, does create challenges because it doesn't necessarily sit and stay in your lungs all the time. So those are some of the challenges you face. So you get a little bit more variability, but we're working on that. I will tell you, we're working on other lyophilized products that could be injectables that would be helpful for distribution around the world. As we sent COVID vaccine, as I was sending it, 115 countries we sent it to, the supply chain was one of our biggest challenges for both -20 and -80. And that was, we were able to get around it thanks to partnerships with the companies, but and sometimes we did it on our own. But those are things we're still working on, and we're not yet there.
We had a call early on regarding logistics and that whole piece of it, and they were saying there aren't enough cargo planes, there's not enough medical grade sand for syringes. Cold storage was like the easy part of that to kind of conquer, but yeah, the number of challenges to that. One last one, and then we'll let you go, is how important is antimicrobial resistance in those efforts to develop new products?
Yeah, this is going to be a constant tension, and it's going to have to be pretty selective in terms of antimicrobials over the years have declined in terms of some of their research areas because of the fears over us making a super drug or super bug. It's terribly important. It's just finding where you have the bacterial threat, deal with it, that's at the appropriate level so it doesn't sort of blossom or bloom in the right environment. And the challenges on some of that is a lot of those occur in the austere environments that we talk about that may have some of the naive resistance as well, but I don't really know. It's going to be interesting to see where that develops, and frankly, that goes back to my teammates at DITRA and the other scientists that are addressing that particular problem.
Great. Well, thank you again, Colonel Clark. We appreciate you coming today. Again, thank you to Kaleo for help bringing him to town and showing him some of the great stuff we have going on here in Indianapolis and Indiana. Thank you all for coming out in person today. This has been a great turnout, and we look forward to seeing you next month for our program on gene therapy. So I'm sure there will be a lot of questions for you afterwards, so we will get to that. But thank you all. Have a great afternoon, and we appreciate you coming. Thank you.